weekly live stream. We have Alex Romanov with us here today from Beam. And to give you guys a short introduction, it's a blockchain and cryptocurrency with privacy, supporting atomic swaps, direct payments, and DeFi. Beam is the top Mimbleware L1 privacy blockchain, completely concealing transactions and making a very private and confidential blockchain infrastructure player. Beam is the best-in-class confidential cryptocurrency and DeFi platform. Beam is a deflationary coin as well as its own cryptocurrency with capped emissions and periodic halving every 4 years, similar to Bitcoin. Beam uses proof-of-work consensus algorithm and is implemented sleek, beautiful, and user-friendly wallets to all platforms, Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android, for the ultimate confidential DeFi experience. Alex, welcome, and we'd love to hear in your own words, what is Beam about? How did it all get started?
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me. You did an amazing introduction and overview of the project. Beam started about 5 years ago. It was actually launched on January 3rd, 2019. It was a very interesting day because it was a 10-year anniversary of Bitcoin Genesis block. So a very symbolic date. And the key idea of Beam was to create or provide privacy for all various uses of both blockchains and cryptocurrency. So we started with confidential transfer of value. And you're probably familiar with other projects in this space, such as Monero and Zcash and other blockchains that provide privacy for your transactions. But then about 2 years ago, we have also added smart contract support. We have developed our own virtual machine that allows you to implement smart contracts. And this allowed us to not only provide confidential transactions just to send tokens from one user to another, but also build all kinds of decentralized applications. And we have provided several basic DeFi applications, such as the decentralized exchange, such as similar to Uniswap, and NFT platform, so people can trade NFTs confidentially, which is also interestingly, some people are interested in showing off parts of their collection, but not just exposing their address to anyone to be able to follow everything they're holding and buying. And right now we are focused on, in addition to all of these applications, we're also focused on Web3 applications that are non-financial. And I think in our context of the discussion of Web3 recruiting platform, it's something that will be kind of also interesting to talk about.
Absolutely. We'll talk a little bit later about how reputation and confidentiality and privacy can all be kind of done for talent exchange, and exactly. How if people have verifiable work histories, but they can remain anon and still do work, right? And there's no kind of professional network that provides that today. So we'll get into that later. But going back to Beam, something that I love is that cryptocurrency is actually, it's got its origins in cryptography, which is meant to be, it was all about privacy, right? And surely enough, as mass adoption came, people kind of disassociated more and more from that. And that did not become the core mission of it, but that's how it all started. It was meant to be independent from the traditional financial system, and it was meant to be more private because, Big Brother and Deep State and all the big institutions are not to be trusted. And that was the whole mission, but people steered away from it. And I have a feeling that that's the reason you guys probably began Beam. So I'd love to hear about that. What is the mission? Why is it important to have private and confidential blockchain?
Yeah, so when Bitcoin was initially created and started, it was always pseudonymous. So you created a new address for your kind of secret key, and it was initially assumed that it's not simple to deduce who you are from this kind of address, which is just a bunch of random numbers and letters. But after Bitcoin became more and more popular, especially with the addition of centralized exchanges, where you do have to provide KYC and identify yourself with your real name and the real data, it became pretty obvious that it's not very difficult to trace your transactions, and especially if you have several points where you actually identify yourself, be able to almost completely understand the entire history of everything you've been doing. And especially when all of these transactions are also forever and ever recorded in the blockchain like they are in Bitcoin, and the values are completely transparent, it's enough to identify your address once, and now we can go back in history of the blockchain and see everything you've been doing. So even though this kind of initial idea of anonymity on Bitcoin existed, it became very obvious that it's not enough. So you need more kind of specific and dedicated mechanisms to provide more privacy, and that's why all of these different privacy projects has emerged. Now, our idea initially was to solve some of the technical issues that existed in all of these privacy blockchains that were back in 2018, such as very large blockchain size. So in addition to the transaction history like in Bitcoin, you also needed to add more data, which is encrypted, and the blockchains became even larger, which was a problem. So we have picked this algorithm, which is called Mimblewimble, which is a funny name from Harry Potter universe, if you're familiar. It's actually the name of the spell that prohibits you from revealing secrets. I'm not a Harry Potter fan, but my daughter explained to me what it means. That the idea of that algorithm was to allow complete confidentiality, like all the transactions are confidential by default, and also keep the blockchain size small. So that was the initial thing that we did. Now, it's important to note that in Mimblewimble specifically, there is absolutely no address information on the blockchain. There are only amounts, and they're all encrypted. So even if somebody would get access to your wallet, they will not be able to see like history of what you did back then. So it's much better for privacy that this information is not even stored on the blockchain at all. Later, what we've done, we have added another interesting algorithm, which is called Lelantus, and we have created this hybrid, which is called Lelantus Mimblewimble. So that's what we're using now. It's very technical. I'm not going into that, but it's important to just say that all of the transactions are confidential by default, and you cannot see any information on chain. So that's how it started.
That's incredibly interesting, and that from a technical, otherwise, I guess everyone, I think there would be a lot more privacy blockchains. So I had quite a challenge, a lot of fun for engineers to work on. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, so what are some of the use cases for dApps that people are building on Beam?
So we have two kind of like families of dApps. We have financial dApps today, and we have non-financial dApps. So an example of a financial application is obviously a decentralized exchange. Uniswap is a kind of more well-known example of such an exchange. And the idea is that you can trade any two tokens. You don't need to get anyone's permission for listing. And all of these new tokens that are created on Beam chain, they're also confidential, just like Beam, which is a big advantage. So you can go very easily to the Beam blockchain today and create a new coin, name it whatever you want, put it into a smart contract, and it will be completely confidential by default, which is important. But in addition to that, we also have non-financial applications. For example, we have Beam Anonymous Name Service, which is similar to Ethereum Name Service, which you're probably familiar with, the ENS. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, they put their ENS in their Twitter accounts or LinkedIn accounts. And basically what I can do is just take the address and go and see everyone who has ever sent them funds, when, why. And obviously, it's not ideal. So the Beam Anonymous Naming Service provides the same functionality, but no one can see who sent you funds or who you sent funds to using this mechanism.
I guess people could argue that on one side, to remain anonymous in crypto is more safe because there's all these North Korean hackers who are targeting people that have public kind of wallets, and then they go try to hack your funds away from you. So to remain anonymous in certain things, right? It's basically increasing your safety. On the other hand, people could argue if you're completely anonymous, then that also helps people to do bad things. So what is your view on that? Is it? I have a suspicious, probably a very libertarian view of how things should be run, but what would you say to those two sides?
Of course. So in order to be able to provide any information that you want to provide to anyone, like it can be to an authority, maybe it's a tax authority, maybe it's your auditor or your person who is doing all of your taxes. What you can do is basically very easily provide proof of anything you have done on chain, and it's going to be a cryptographic proof. So you can say, listen, these are my transactions, these are the invoices, these are all of the documentation that was signed during this transaction, and it corresponds to those transactions on chain. So we call it opt-in auditability. This is the kind of set of features that allows you, if you want to be compliant with any current regulation, you can do that. But it's up to you. It's not like somebody can take a look at the blockchain without your knowledge and just, spy or deduce anything about you. If you want to be compliant, there is not a problem. And indeed, Beam provides integrations with many payment service providers and online stores and services that use Beam and accept Beam. And they're completely compliant because they are using these features to send all the audits that they need without any problem. So there is no kind of dilemma between being private or being auditable. You can be both. But the importance of this privacy is that you are not just kind of hiding from someone. However, you are in control and you are deciding who and which information is exposed about you, right? So you are in control over the over your privacy. Like we call it confidentiality because that's exactly the correct term. Privacy is a little bit broad, but confidentiality is exactly the ability to determine which information about you is known and to whom.
I think control and ownership economy is part of the reason we're all into Web3, right? So obviously, I think your mission is super important. And you could argue that by seeing the transaction someone's had on the wallet, they see that they have an active wallet and they've done transactions in a way that builds their reputation. So you have basically a trusted party you're transacting with. If you see that maybe it's someone without transactions or something like that, then maybe you're more wary until that person, kind of prove it. I mean, how would you say people could build their reputations while retaining confidentiality? Because that's something crucial for example, for us in the exchange of talent. In order to hire someone, how could you enable that without having KYC or without having someone being doxxed or knowing their identity, for example?
Yeah, so if I would have to answer in one sentence, it would be zero knowledge proofs. But just to kind of explain, there are all different kinds of zero knowledge proofs. But the idea of the zero knowledge proof is that you can prove some statement about yourself without exposing the information that comes while building this statement. The simplest example is, for example, inside Beam, we are using today something called the range proof. So, for example, you want to prove that some number is between 1 and 1 million without exposing the number. So you can create a proof that says, I can prove to you that this number is within this range, but I don't show you the exact number. Okay. So the same idea is applicable to other properties. Like, for example, I can say, I can create a proof that I worked at a specific company from this date to that date, or that I have participated in, I don't know, C++, Udemy course, or any other property that you would like to be able to present about yourself. Of course, it's not something that you can do immediately today, because you do need some kind of a mechanism so that Udemy can be this authority that creates this proof for you. And this is where platforms like Bondex come to kind of their, one of their goals, I think, is to create these points where those authorities can come and participate in Web3 economy. It sounds a little bit complicated, but the benefits are enormous because, first of all, we can all agree that I am a developer for the last 20 years, and I've been looking for work a lot of times. I worked in many different companies, and it's very important for me when I'm looking for work. It's very important for me to not necessarily allow everyone in the world to know this. I might be doing this while I didn't yet inform my current company. So I'm just starting to, feel the market and see which positions are available. I don't know I don't want everyone to immediately be able to see this. And this is one point. Obviously, I would not necessarily like everyone to be able to see the salary that I'm negotiating for, right? So there are a lot of interesting points where your privacy is important to you. And one of the amazing things that we have discovered in Beam during these 5 years is that, interestingly, in some cases, people care less about their financial privacy, but they care a lot more about the privacy of their data, their personal lives, and many aspects of their life. So when people go and they buy tokens on Ethereum, which is completely transparent, of course, and they trade and they create portfolios, they buy NFTs, they don't care that everybody is monitoring them. But if you would come and say, oh yeah, and let's talk about your personal life, where do you work, what do you do, and then people start kind of to take this a little bit more seriously. So in many aspects, non-financial applications need even more privacy, and sometimes it's even more interesting privacy than financial ones.
I think what our approach at BondX, and those are excellent points, and completely aligned with you on them, is something that you said earlier. It's about you controlling it, right? At the end of the day, professional data and your personal data is extremely valuable. But what Web2 platforms do is that they monetize them, and you become the product without really you being part of the economic equation. So what we want at BondX is, listen, this data is extremely valuable. You get to choose if and how it's monetized. If you want it to be exposed to advertising, or you want to sell your data to an AI company to train your model, whatever it is, if you accept it, you choose if and how your data is monetized, and you get a revenue share from it. So that's our approach. And if someone chooses not to monetize their data and not to have that publicly distributed in any way, then it remains completely private and under their control. So that's kind of our approach and part of our crucial mission as well. So we're extremely aligned there, and very interesting about the privacy points that you said. And something to go more down the talent, because I was asking you before about the structure of the team at Beam, which is very decentralized. So I love to talk about different workforce models. So how do you guys get stuff done at Beam, in this fully decentralized way? How does the team work? How do you communicate? How do you align incentives?
It's a great question. So Beam went through three stages. At first, it was a standard company. We raised investor funds, and we have set up a development team. And I think it's maybe a little bit different from a lot of other companies, because most of the people that worked in Beam team initially and during the first several years were either my personal friends and people who I worked with before, and their friends. So it was basically a friend brings a friend kind of situation, mostly. We did use recruiters, but not too often. Probably a couple of times we worked with recruiters who I also personally know and work with. So it was a lot of tight connections and acquaintances. We never used LinkedIn. We never used platforms, but during these first years at least. And then at some point we switched from Beam Company to Beam Foundation, which is a non-profit organization. So we got rid of all the titles, and no more CEO, COO, CTO. I kept my CTO in the Twitter account, mostly for nostalgic and appearance's sake, but there is no chief officers, whatever. And the third step is moving from the nonprofit foundation to the DAO structure, which is what we're in the middle of right now. So once we have moved from kind of the centralized, standard company structure to more decentralized, obviously we changed some of the processes that we had, right? So before we had a very straightforward agile process cycle with like product definitions and then development, testing, etc. And now is more based on bounties for specific tasks. So there is usually a discussion with the community about which features we want to build in the next quarter. And then we allocate resources and bounties to specific people that are best suited to implement those. One of the things that we did not manage to do really well is to attract open source developers who come from outside Beam team. And there are several reasons for that. The first one is that Beam is pretty complex technologically. It's like hardcore C++. It requires a lot of time to get into, and usually the easier it is, the more documentation is available, the more frameworks are available to get started in developing something, the more there are chances that people from outside will come and build something. So we did not manage to create that. once we have added the decentralized applications that basically use web technologies, it became a little bit easier, but still like not very easy. We are going to do a hackathon soon that will kind of attempt to bring more people into the platform building applications, because to build applications is a little bit more accessible than the infrastructure parts. Yeah, so that's mostly how we get by today, kind of bounties and using the good old team to implement those.
That's a super interesting approach. It seems like you guys are obviously have evolved over time, and you're practicing what you preach, right? Privacy, control, decentralization. Then, as an organization, we need to practice what we preach. So I commend you for that, because it's not always easy, right?
It's very difficult.
It is very difficult.
Yeah, and we're not there yet. We're in the process. We're slowly moving there, but we're not.
And
not
my last question for today would be, what would you say to people that are coming into the Web3 space as a professional? And because Beam is a DAO, how would you propose people, or what would you tell them to sell them on the, hey, you should work on a project basis, you should work for different DAOs, and you should be kind of like a future work, approach, and more project-based fractional working. So what would your pitch for people to join, for example, Beam and work on the Beam project? What would your pitch be? What are the ups, what are the pros of switching to such a lifestyle and a work mode?
It's a great question. So I would separate it into three things. So the first one is working on open source projects in general. So for me, it was the first time I worked on a truly open source project. And the benefit for developers when you are working on the open source project is that you don't need to tell anyone what you have been doing for the last 5 years. You can just say, listen, here it is. It's open source. Go to GitHub. That's my repository. That's my username. You can see everything I've been doing, and it's very effective. When you go to an interview and they start to ask you to implement the Fibonacci series and all that crap. So, I mean, listen, I've been building Beam. Look at it. It's hardcore C++. We have like a lot of interesting algorithms. We have a lot of interesting infrastructure implemented, and you've been working on that. So it makes your kind of, be able to show people what you've been doing much easier. So contributing to open source projects has this advantage. That's the first thing. The second thing about Web3. Web3 is the result of very, very big success of Web2. Like we all rely on a lot of big platforms. And this amount of data, the amount of trust that we need to put into those platforms has reached some very high level and probably peak that we can no longer live with this amount of trust. And we see this every day now, what happens with Twitter, what happens with Reddit and other big centralized platforms. So Web3 is a very good and interesting direction, both from architectural and technical point of view, and also from social and economic point of view. So working on Web3 projects, in my opinion, is one of the kind of more interesting things you could be doing today as a developer. And the third thing, which is also something that I've been doing for the first time in Beam, but it's very important, when you are working directly with a community. So they're not your users, like you work in some large corporation and somebody somewhere sells something and you don't ever see this person. In crypto specifically, and in Web3 in general, there is an immediate feedback. You produce a feature, people comment, people talk to you. You live within this kind of interesting ecosystem that I have never experienced before, and I really liked it. And I love our community. I love the feedback, and it's not always a positive feedback, obviously. And there is a discussion. There are a lot of kind of criticism and talk, and it creates a completely different atmosphere, which I love. And I think if you haven't had the chance to experience that, you should, because it's very amazing and different.
Thank you so much. That was a complete reason. Everyone keep those 3 reasons in mind why it is great to contribute to open source projects and projects such as Beam. Go check them out. Whether you want a wallet and private transactions, or whether you're an engineer and you want a real challenge and to be in a very vibrant ecosystem, I think Beam is a place for you. Alex, thank you so much for your time. Where should people go find more about Beam and more about you?
So our website is beam.mw. And we are also very active on Telegram. So just look Beam Privacy on Telegram, follow us on Twitter on Beam Privacy, and you will find us.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you for all bonus for tuning in. Thank you very much for another exciting edition of the live stream. Thank you all. Have a great week.
Thank you very much.